Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with this Thursday expert, Mr. Jonathan Twomley. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, hey, one of the things I wanted to talk about is my specific focus is consumers, more specifically consumer confidence, because I want to know where the masses are thinking as far as, are they scared or are they greedy, right? I don't know if greedy is the right word, but right. Basically, are they
Feeling
fearful
good.
or not? Feeling good,
Yeah,
right?
feeling good.
Feeling good. And the reason I want to talk about this with you is because, again, I know zero about the Chinese economy, but I suspect the Chinese citizens are a lot like American citizens in that when they see craziness going on in and around them, i.e. stock market getting hammered on tech, rule changes, oh, by the way, property potentially, bubble bursting, they are likely to get very nervous or fearful. And if the Chinese citizens get fearful, that will obviously hurt the Chinese economy, but they are so large and so big, they may have ripples across the world. So I want to talk to you about just consumer confidence or the consumer in general. Do you follow? Do you track it? Do you think it's an important metric? And then if so, do you see similarities between maybe the US and China in that regards?
So I don't really follow this
Okay.
as closely as you do, but I do think it's important. And, in terms of similarities between China and the US, I don't know, but the Chinese real estate market is very, very interesting. And I think there are going to be some ripple effects for sure.
Okay.
I think the real comparison is perhaps with Japan,
Okay.
between Japan and China, which I do have a lot of knowledge about.
Okay,
So
great.
we can talk about that, but why don't you start off by talking about sort of what you wanted to
yes. So this is what I see. And again, I take my experience from the Great Recession in the US, the dot-com crash as well. It's kind of all melding together in China, right? So when I look at the Chinese market, again, only can read what's reported here. And oh, by the way, I've been to China, so I've seen the buildings with nobody in them, right? I've actually
ghost cities.
Ghost cities. That's the word I was looking for. So I've been there. I've been in Asia lots of times. So I've seen the property market years ago being what I would have called a bubble, right? They got really crazy, like 40 times average incomes. And it was the most bubble-like market in the world for years, but it had been there for years. The other thing I had seen is the Chinese millennials actually own on average 1.5 homes, right? So that became not only a status symbol, it became what you had to do to get married, right? They had the whole one child thing for a while, and you would only be able to get married if you had assets. Again, these are all things that were going on in that economy. Why housing went on longer than maybe ordinarily would have done, right? It was in the culture. It was a thing.
Right.
And now what has happened is obviously Evergrande started this. There's now 5 or 6 developers down the stack that can't pay back debt. They have these 3 red lines where property developers can't borrow. Now they have property developers selling off pieces of their business at a discount. It's a recipe to dent the psychology of home ownership. Now they have millennials doing what they call doom scrolling, right? They're not exuberant like people were here in the US in 2006. They're now like, oh my God, see that idiot? I don't want to be that idiot. You're seeing a changing psychology. And then finally, what I think happens is what happened here. People conserve. They stop spending. And China, on average, saves a lot more than US. Yeah. Let's just be clear. So, right, they saved like 28% or something is their average, and we're like 6 or something. It's just noticeably different. But if that goes up, we're going to see this kind of domino effect where real estate values take a hit, and then that hits the psychology again, and then they sell. And it's kind of like the Great Recession, where here it was a bunch of bad debt and adjustable rate mortgages that caused people to sell when they were underwater. There, it's, you see people in front of banks wailing and where's my money? And it's just, I think the Chinese citizen is not going to like what's going on, and it's going to surprise the CCP with just how slow their economy is. And I'm predicting a negative print for GDP in China, which is unheard of. Right. They used to get upset at 8% growth. So, and if that happens, negative growth, I think that has ripples across the world. So that's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about first, like why this is different from the US.
Okay.
But by different, I mean, potentially worse. And then the parallels with Japan, which I think
Okay,
are a lot, but also
please.
potentially worse. So the thing about China, right, is that the Chinese have even more of their wealth tied up in real estate than Americans,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And and also home ownership is like 90% in China. It's only 67, 68% here. And that's recent. It, it's just ticked up dramatically because of COVID.
Mhm.
But in China, it's 90%. And as you said, Chinese millennials own more than one home, and they don't. So their wealth is really, really tied up in real estate. And the thing that I've never quite been able to get my head around is that much of this real estate is is empty. It is not.
Yeah.
It is not
It's not
used.
producing income.
Well, not only that, but it's also not producing any utility. This is not like
Yes.
Americans might own a second house that they go on vacation to,
Yeah, a
right?
lot of these are unfinished. You're right.
Right. They're not even unfinished. They're just sitting there and no one will ever live in them, right?
Mhm.
Like that's not the idea. And honestly, so they buy apartments as a place to put money and to grow wealth.
Mhm.
But it's all based on the greater fool theory, right?
Agreed.
It's all, they cannot monetize that wealth unless they sell.
Mhm.
And they can only sell if there's somebody willing to buy.
Mhm.
In some respects, the Chinese real estate market is exactly like Bitcoin, right? It is based on the idea that, oh, it's going to go up because everybody thinks it's going to go up, but you can only monetize that wealth if you sell it to somebody else who believes it's going to go up more than you believe it's going to go
And
up.
there
And then
and there's one more wrinkle. Sorry to interrupt, but there's one more wrinkle. The Chinese home buyer, typically speaking, wants new versus secondhand.
oh, so that is another interesting wrinkle. So like
Yes.
basically you've got essentially everyone buying assets
Mhm.
that are deteriorating assets,
Yes.
right? They're
It,
depreciating assets and the market wants new. So and no one's going to live in them. They're not going to vacation because you've seen the pictures, right?
oh yeah.
They're apartment blocks in
Yep.
in what used to be a rice paddy somewhere.
Yeah.
They're not like condos overlooking the ocean with a nice view. Like
Mhm.
you're never going to go there and spend time there, right?
Mhm.
And also let's talk about this too. China has recently ended its one-child policy, but
Yes.
it's too little, too late, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. It
they
takes a while.
they created essentially they engineered population decline,
Yep.
and so what you have is this situation where the entire thing is dependent on somebody being willing to buy your quote unquote used condo from you, that when they want new condos. That's one flaw in the logic. And the second thing is you've got fewer people
Yep.
coming behind you to buy them, right?
Exactly.
So this is just a huge uh, mess waiting to happen, and potentially worse than the great financial crisis
Oh yeah.
than the US. Now, the thing that I don't know about China is whether people have been able to finance these things or if they have to buy them for cash. If they have to buy them for cash, then the damage will be
Muted.
more limited because you
Yeah.
won't have banks failing when people can't pay.
Mhm.
But like we did here, right?
Mhm.
When people stopped paying those mortgages, we had a lot of bank failures. But if people were able to finance those apartments, then that's really going to create a huge banking crisis in Japan. So people will get their equity wiped out if they bought them in cash, but they will not be still on the hook for like a worthless
Right.
piece of real estate. So this is a very dangerous situation, I think. Now, so that's why I think it's potentially worse than in the
Okay.
US, because
Yeah.
more people exposed, right? And uh and just like a higher percentage of people's exposure, right?
Mhm.
So now here's how it's like Japan, but also worse.
Okay.
When you talked about the psychology of the situation, like Japan, so China has had basically spectacular economic growth since about 1990, right?
Yeah. 90, 92, something like that.
Yeah, so maybe starting in the very late 80s when they first started opening their economy.
Mhm.
So so the Chinese have come to believe that like that economic growth is just like what happens, right? They don't believe
Yeah,
that,
it's just this. It's a like gravity. It just happens.
right. They don't believe that uh, the economy can contract. And
I
a
agree.
whole generation of people have grown up
Yeah,
like experiencing nothing else, right?
agreed.
And then you've also got some additional factors like historically, basically until the 1700s, China was like the biggest, most important country in the entire world, right? And they just, even really until the 1800s. It's only the last like 200 plus years where China has been anything other than like the biggest, richest, wealthiest country in the world.
Okay.
And so there's that cultural memory of like, we are the biggest, richest, and most important country in the world. And that was like stolen from us by the West for the last 200 years. And now we're back and we're like taking our rightful place in the world as the biggest, richest, most important country in the world. Right. So all of these things have built up, I think, the average Chinese person into thinking that like growth is just inevitable, like it's just going to happen. And so they're not prepared for a crash. And so if a crash happens, it's going to be really psychologically devastating and destabilizing. And the parallel to Japan is that Japan had spectacular economic growth from 1945, right, all the way through 1989. So 44 years, they had like a couple of hiccups, but basically,
uninterrupted growth.
Basically uninterrupted growth for all that time. Plus, when you got into the bubble in the 1980s, the Japanese really began to think that they were unbeatable, superior. There's like a whole list. You could go to the bookstore in Japan.
I remember,
and there was an entire section of every bookstore that was basically, it's called Nihon Jinron. The best translation of it is like sort of like the theory of Japaneseness, right? It's all about like, and all those books were basically about like how Japan is superior, how like it's all that. I mean, you can imagine like going into like the section of a US bookstore where like you had a whole wall of books about like how Americans are like genetically and culturally and in every other way like superior to the rest of the world.
Just naturally superior.
Right. So people like really bought into this for a while. And then the crash happened and it was such a devastating blow, right? That it had an even bigger effect than it would have had in the US because it knocked that sense of
the psychology of the citizen.
Both that think of like that the people think it's impossible, right? We can't stop growing. Plus then that long period of growth leads a lot of people to this feeling of like superiority. And then like you knock that out from under people and it's devastating. And then so they went into a long recession and long period of kind of stagnation. And in lots of ways the Chinese modeled their economy after Japan, right? So and they have a lot of the same kinds of like the Japanese never really cleared up their bad debt problem. They just kind of swept it under the rug. And I think you'll see the same thing happen in China, where you'll have all this bad debt that
zombie companies and all that.
Zombie companies that can't write them up. They just keep on extending the debt and let them go. And it's sort of like that is going to suck a huge amount of vitality out of the Chinese economy.
I think so too.
For a very long time. So I think you might see, I think the chances of, I don't think that the government is going to be able to like engineer high growth again.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
I think they will, if there is a crash, right? I think that they will look a lot like Japan. Will be very heavily indebted. They'll be kind of like playing triage in the whole economy.
Kind of a lost decade, if you will.
Yeah, keeping companies on life support. And I think you'll see growth. They won't be like officially in recession, but it's just not going to be the kind of spectacular growth that they've had. And they've got and when you add into the demographic headwinds, right? Because the population is aging, that alone is going to cause growth to decline because people stop being producers and they start becoming only consumers, right? They
Yep.
start instead of saving, then they're now withdrawing their savings, right?
Exactly. Yep.
I mean, and that's another thing we didn't even talk about. Like, if all those people in China, because China has like no kind of pension system whatsoever, right? At least Japan has a very good pension system, right? They've had all sorts of scandals with it, but basically people know they're getting a pension in Japan. They also save a lot of money in cash in Japan. China has a very high savings rate, but I think they all dumped it into real estate. If their
Exactly.
expectation was, I'm going to be living off of, I'm going to sell this apartment and live off that when I retire, and now they can't. And I've seen just sort of stories in the press about people, you know, they're like standing outside Evergrande's, you
Yep.
know,
Wealth
offices
management. Yep.
and screaming at people who come out saying like, all my retirement savings are in that apartment that I just bought from you,
Yep.
right? That was their retirement plan. So if that money, either they can't get it out because China has now, they've blocked sales. I don't know if you picked this up. They're not letting people sell real estate anymore because they know that they don't want there to be a, you know,
cascading crash.
So if people can't sell their, it doesn't really matter now, right? Either the money's locked in there and they can't get it, or it's going to lose value. And so the retirement savings just went poof.
Yeah,
and like,
it's not good.
What's that going to do to aggregate demand in an aging society where people were depending on that to live?
It's not good.
Right. It's not good.
It's not
so
good. Yeah. This is what I'm watching. I'm watching that. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a mess. So,
and I know, I think we had a discussion like 2 weeks ago where we concluded it wasn't going to be a big problem. I mean, it's still, how much it affects us remains to be seen.
Right.
But I do think like you can't take the second biggest economy in the world or biggest, I can't remember which it is now, and have it go through like a major economic crisis without there being some kind of effect.
There will be
elsewhere. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what if here's one, like, what if the Chinese decide that they need to start liquidating their position in US treasuries because they need money?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, then interest rates go up, and then, you know, it spreads here. So
yeah, it's gonna be a mess. Something I am certainly watching, and it's cascading. It's already growing. So this has been a great conversation, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Topic number 3 is an important one. You are announcing something, which I am so glad to hear about. We will save that for number 3. How can people find you, Jonathan?
So the best way to become part of my world is to join my free Facebook group, which is called the Multifamily Investment Community. We're closing in on 12,000 members of that group. It is spam free, solicitation free, BS free. We just talk about multifamily real estate. And the one request is join on a computer, because there are 3 questions you have to answer, and Facebook only shows them to you on a computer, not your phone. You can always use your phone later, but the first time,
do yourself a favor, folks. Join the group. I'm a part of it. It is an amazing group to watch. I learn stuff all the time. So thank you for moderating, making the spam free, deal free, all of that. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.